taking an online class. The class had already ended. But the professor forgot to turn off the camera. So the more than 30 students in the class all witnessed a young and beautiful woman walking out of the room behind him. On the screen, they hugged each other and then kissed. 2 days later, the professor stopped me on the road, with delicate eyebrows and eyes. An indifferent expression. He asked in a cold voice, "How much did you see?" I tried to walk around him. But he grabbed my arm. His voice softened. He lowered his eyes, tugged at my sleeve, and said, "It's not what you think." The class started at 8 o'clock in the morning. At 8:03, I ran into the classroom, out of breath with messy hair. The PPT slid to the next page. Xavier raised his eyes, arched his eyebrows, and swept a cold glance at me. Then he raised his chin at the teaching assistant, parted his thin lips, and uttered 4 cold words, "Mark her as absent." In an instant, many eyes in the classroom turned towards the podium, accompanied by some sparse whispers. Xavier's father's rule was always that being late or leaving early for 15 minutes would be marked as an absence. But today, he made an exception just for me. He marked me as absent for being only 3 minutes late. To put it more seriously, this was blatant targeting, openly giving me a hard time. The whispers below didn't stop and were even getting louder. Xavier put down the remote control, rested his arms on the podium, looked around, hooked the corners of his lips into a smile, and asked, "Do you have any objections?" Of course, there were objections. But no one dared to voice them. The classroom fell silent. I bent over and bowed to Xavier as an apology. He nodded slightly, threw out a "come in and attend the class," then turned around and calmly continued from where he left off. I walked to my seat and sat down. A familiar classmate leaned over, covered half of his face with his hand, and asked in a low voice, "Did you provoke him?" "How could that be?" The classmate from the back seat interrupted midway, saying, with Rainie's timid personality, she wouldn't even dare to provoke a mouse she met on the road. "That's true." The classmate who spoke earlier thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. She'd have to have her brain and excretory organs swapped to dare to provoke Xavier's father. The two of them echoed each other and actually started seriously discussing the reason why I was targeted. I ignored them, opened the book, and looked up at the person teaching on the podium. He was dressed in a formal suit, exuding a cold and abstinent air. When writing on the blackboard, he occasionally revealed a clean and fair wrist. All his facial features were extremely delicate, presenting a very impactful aesthetic, especially those phoenix-like eyes, which carried a hint of sharpness even when he wasn't angry. My thoughts gradually drifted. I might indeed have provoked him. During the summer vacation, when we were taking online classes. At the beginning of August, we were taking online classes for the elective course plan biology. It was so incredibly boring. I slept through each class. It had been a whole week of online classes, and I hadn't absorbed anything. One day, at 11:30 in the morning, in a daze, I heard a clear and pleasant voice coming from the computer where the online class was being held. I heard it clearly. The voice said, "Class is over." Such beautiful Chinese words. It was like listening to celestial music, making my ears feel refreshed. I suddenly opened my eyes, planning to turn off the computer and go out for a meal. The next moment, my hand holding the mouse froze halfway. There was no prompt on the screen indicating that the live broadcast had ended. On the screen was a tall and slender man, hugging a woman and kissing her. One of the woman's legs was even hooked around his waist. They were inseparable, passionate, and exciting. It was unbelievable. I slapped myself hard to confirm that I had indeed been in class just now and hadn't accidentally opened some astonishing website while drowsy. And I picked up the phone on the table and opened WeChat. In the class group without the teacher, the messages had indeed scrolled to over 99. Which brave soul can go and remind the teacher to turn off the camera? Is it still too late to pretend I don't know about it? The brave soul is here. I've sent the message. But the teacher didn't respond. My habit of feeling embarrassed for others has flared up again. My toes almost dug out a Barbie dream house. The messages came flooding in, popping up one after another without end. Occasionally, There were also two different voices. Such as, "Are you sure that's the teacher himself on the screen? He's been facing away from the camera. And we can't see his face." "Yeah. And there was a moment of black screen just now. The person on the screen now seems to be dressed differently from the teacher who was teaching before." But once such doubts emerged, they were quickly pushed down by the newly popped up messages. I closed my phone and glanced at the screen again. The passionate kissing scene was still going on. The man's hand around the woman's waist was white, slender, and with distinct knuckles. On his wrist, there was a faint red scar that wasn't very obvious. The wrist, the scar. I looked at it, and an extremely strong sense of familiarity, much stronger than before, welled up in my heart. The intimate scene in front of me suddenly became extremely glaring. My hand holding the phone unconsciously tightened, and my knuckles gradually turned white. My unreasonably arising hatred grew and then spread wildly, like the vigorous vines in spring, continuously spreading and instantly devouring all my rationality. The next moment, all the things on the table, including the computer, were swept to the ground by me. Various small objects collided heavily with the marble floor, making several crisp sounds in succession. That sound finally brought me back to my senses. I suddenly stood up and stared blankly at the mess on the ground. But in my heart, a thought suddenly became extremely clear: the person who appeared on the screen later wasn't Xavier's father. 2 days later, I was walking on the road when I was stopped by a man. The man was tall, straight, and handsome. The brim of his baseball cap was pulled down very low, and a mask covered most of his face. He was dressed in black clothes and black pants. He looked very cool. Cool, but also very strange. And there was a hint of familiarity in that strangeness. I originally wanted to turn around and run away, thinking it was better to retreat first. But there were people coming and going all around, and there was a mobile police station less than 300 meters ahead. Judging by the surrounding environment, it seemed safe. So I calmed down and wanted to ask him what he wanted first. Unexpectedly, heading to my accession, he spoke first. "How much did you see about what happened that day?" I was confused and asked him back. What happened? Could it be that he was at the scene of a murder for money? The strange man in front of me raised his eyebrows when he heard this, clicked his tongue softly, and his tone became a bit impatient as he said, "Don't play dumb." I was also impatient. "Just get to the point. Stop beating around the bush," I said. After I finished speaking, no one said anything for a long time. The crowd was surging, but between him and me, there was a deathly silence. Finally, hadn't fulfilled voyance, an ant passed by and scolded us for blocking the way. It was as if he had just come to his senses. He pulled me and turned into a small alley sideways. Before I could react, he had already taken off the mask on his face. I swear by my advanced mathematics grades that his beauty was really breathtaking. His phoenix-like eyes were long and narrow. The corners of his eyes turned up, and combined with the delicate and handsome lower half of his face that was now revealed. He was simply the favorite of the creator. I stared straight at the face of this favorite. After a long while, I finally slapped my forehead, realized who he was, and tentatively asked, "Xavier's father?" "Shut up." These 3 words seemed to have touched his sore spot. A thin layer of red appeared at the corners of the man's eyes. He suddenly exerted force and pressed me against the wall. Then, one on a low sigh, he bent down and said word by word in my ear, gnashing his teeth, "I'm not him." When he said this, his left hand was propped against the wall. With a slight adjustment of my sight, I could see the half of his wrist exposed under his sleeve, with a red mark on it. The person in front of me was the one who had been hugging and passionately kissing the woman in front of the whole class that day. So now, why was he stopping me? I tried my best to step back, and there was no more space between my back and the cold wall. Then I raised my eyes and met his gaze. We were too close. I could even clearly see that his beautiful phoenix-like eyes were now filled with a chill. It seemed that he was really angry because I had called him Xavier's father just now. We stared at each other for a long time, but I didn't wait for him to speak for a long while. I could only speak first and ask, "Do you want something from me?" He looked at me, nodded slightly, and said, Yes. He was really a man of few words. This conversation was like squeezing toothpaste. If it were someone else, I would have been impatient long ago. But for him, I was surprisingly patient. When I spoke again, my voice was so soft that even I was surprised. I even smiled and asked him, "So what do you want?" He pursed his lips, as if hesitating. Then he stood up straight and let his hands hang down by his sides. The red mark then hid back under his sleeve again. "It's still the same question." His voice was hoarse. "How much did you see about what happened that day? The day of the online class?" This was originally an easy question to answer, and I could just make up something. But perhaps it was by some strange impulse that I didn't answer him directly. Instead, I raised my head, looked him straight in the eyes, and asked with a smile. "There were more than 30 people online that day. Why did you stop me alone? Do you think you're very important to me?" There was no response. There was a long silence. I felt very bored. I was just about to casually tell him that I didn't see anything, and that he could rest assured, and then turn around and leave. But then I suddenly heard him speak. He said, "Yes." He just casually threw out a single word. But for me, it was like a thunderclap out of the blue. What did this mean? Did he care about my opinion of him kissing someone else? Ding, the bell rang for the end of the class. And my thoughts were pulled back to reality. I raised my eyes and looked towards the podium. My gaze happened to meet Xavier's father's. But it was only for an instant. He quickly averted his eyes, said in a cold voice that class was over, and walked out of the classroom quickly. Although it wasn't March and spring, the several peach trees of all seasons beside the teaching building were already lush and full of leaves. The blushing peach petals were blown about by the wind. After Xavier's father left the classroom, he stepped into this picturesque and beautiful scene. He walked like the wind, with a posture as graceful as a fragrant orchid and a jade tree. Xavier's father had always had an excellent reputation in the college. There was no reason for him to target me just because I had met that person during the summer vacation. Perhaps he was just in a bad mood today, and I was 3 minutes late for his class. So I just happened to run into his bad temper. That was all. I stared at his back for a long time, then came back to my senses, packed my textbooks, and walked out of the classroom with the crowd. But the cruel truth soon slapped me hard in the face. And it told me that all those words I had comforted myself with in my heart before were all nonsense. Xavier was indeed targeting me. On Tuesday, after the evening self-study ended, I walked out of the teaching building. The weather in March, the early spring, still had a bit of a chilly edge. The evening wind blew gust by gust, cold and eerie, like an evil wind. I just raised my hand and put the hood of my sweatshirt over my head. Out of the corner of my eye, from an unexpected direction, a dark figure suddenly rushed out. I was startled. I steadied the books in my arms and took a closer look at the person. It was the teaching assistant of Xavier's father. So I smiled in a friendly manner and asked him gently, "Senior, is there something you need from me? Can't he walk properly?" The teaching assistant nodded seriously and said earnestly, "It's a big deal. It will affect your credits." I was completely confused. The teaching assistant continued, "You haven't handed in your homework twice. Plus, you've been marked absent twice. If you want to pass the course plant biology, you need to score at least 85 points or above in the final exam. But judging by your current level, this is about as likely as me getting into the top 3 of the whole major. It's both a challenge of the impossible." No way. I almost suspected that there was something wrong with my hearing. I pulled the books closer to my chest and asked in confusion, "I've only attended one of his classes this week. How can I be marked absent twice? Where did that come from?" The teaching assistant furrowed his brows. "The professor remembered this morning that you were 1 minute late for his class last Wednesday afternoon. So he added the absent mark for you." I really began to doubt the world. Can he just add it like that? Maybe my face was a bit ferocious at this moment. So the teaching assistant trembled and took a cautious step backward, saying, "In principle, he really shouldn't be able to do that. I understand. But right now Xavier's father is simply unreasonable." "Fine," let out a low sigh. "Really fine." I nodded resignedly. Then I suddenly remembered something and asked him, "What about the homework? What's going on with me not handing in the homework? Since I was a child, I felt uncomfortable all over if I didn't finish my homework. I might provoke cats and dogs, climb trees, dig out bird nests, climb over walls, or go online. But it's impossible for me not to hand in my homework." The teaching assistant didn't say anything more. But there was no need for more words. Everything was understood without being said. It was Xavier who was causing trouble for me. Under my sinister and somewhat resentful gaze, the teaching assistant turned around neatly and fled. His thin figure quickly disappeared into the boundless night. I stood there alone, facing the desolate night wind. But I didn't feel cold at all, because I was already burning with anger. I've been attending classes diligently 5 days a week, getting up early for the 8 o'clock classes, and never missing a sign-in. Now I'm facing the risk of failing the final exam. After being apart for a long time, Xavier is still as cold and unfeeling as before, just like always, with no improvement at all. This is something that cannot be tolerated. Students who have received higher education often adopt the most straightforward way to safeguard their rights. I chose to confront Xavier directly. On the 6th floor of the building, at the end of the corridor, the door of the office was just ajar. I raised my hand and knocked a few times. After a moment, a clear male voice came from inside, "Come in." I followed his words, pushed the door open, and then turned around and locked the door. Yes, had him fulfilled my obsession. I locked it. I locked it from the inside. Xavier was sitting behind the desk, wearing a well-fitted formal suit, looking upright and noble. When he heard the sound of the door being locked, his eyebrows furrowed slightly, and he looked up. Then, he let out a sneer. "What? Are you here to accuse me?" My eyes turned green with anger. There seemed to be the two cruel words, "fail," the course shining brightly on Xavier's head. I secretly clenched my palms, trying my best to suppress the urge to kill. Then I walked up to him and stood still. Next, I should have questioned and accused his improper behavior righteously, criticized him for violating the professional ethics of teachers, and reasonably safeguarded my rights. But I had drafted so many words in my mind before coming in. I picked and chose for a long time, and for a moment, I didn't know which sentence to say first, so I got stuck. So Xavier spoke before me. The corners of his lips held a casual smile, and he drawled lazily, "It seems you really are here to ask for an explanation. But before that, you should also reflect on why I'm only targeting you and not others. Is there something wrong with you?" What a strange logic. I now think there's something wrong with his mind. But it was precisely because of our current teacher-student relationship. In this situation, I still maintained a relatively friendly tone of voice and said, "I really don't know what I did wrong. How about you give me some pointers?" "Stop pretending." The person in front of me suddenly wiped the smile off his face and cast a cold glance at me. When his beautiful phoenix eyes didn't hold a smile, his gaze at people was very sharp. My back felt cold for no reason. Xavier looked at me, opened his lips slowly, and spoke deliberately, word by word. Each word stabbed at my heart. "You remembered what happened in the past a long time ago, didn't you? You still remember Brother Xavier. And you also remember Arno. The encounter with Arno on the street that day was arranged by you on purpose, right?" Here, he deliberately paused for a moment, his fingertips rubbing the pages of a book. Then, he spoke again, "If you still have lingering feelings for him, as Arno's brother, I don't mind taking even more excessive actions against you." The person in front of me was clearly unhurried, his tone soft and slow. But every word he uttered seemed to carry 1,000 pounds of force, hitting my heart heavily. After all these years, the mental defenses I had painstakingly built up were, at this moment, crumbling and falling apart, bit by bit. He was right. I had already remembered what happened in the past. I still had lingering feelings for Arno. That day, he stopped me on the street because I deliberately induced and arranged it. I first met Arno when I was 8 years old. I was a professional scammer. When I saw a luxury car on the road, I would lie down in front of it. Naturally, my foster parents would jump out at this time and act as the righteous passers-by. Most car owners would choose to settle the matter quietly, pay money to avoid trouble, and get it over with. The social atmosphere back then was not as good as it is now, and many rules and regulations were still not perfect. Our group of people were like rats in a dark ditch, doing such disgusting and shady things day after day. This was how we made a living. Unfortunately, hadn't fulfilledly. If you walk by the river often, your shoes will eventually get wet. It was probably winter. Most likely around New Year's Eve. There were big red lanterns all over the street, and everywhere was decorated with colorful lights. Even the goods displayed in the shop windows had been replaced with large areas of red tones. It looked very festive. But what did all that have to do with me? The children in my foster parents' family didn't have the right to celebrate festivals. In the winter morning, a thin layer of new snow covered the ground. I limped out wearing only a thin coat, half of my face buried in my scarf. I was limping because I hadn't extorted any money back yesterday. So I got a beating from my foster father. And that red and white knitted scarf was the only thing I had to keep warm. Facing the cold wind, I walked out of the narrow alley where we lived and then bypassed several paths lined with plane trees to reach a relatively more prosperous and lively place. I had repeated this daily routine countless times, and was very familiar with it. There shouldn't have been any mistakes. But something went wrong that day. When I reached the end of the alley and was about to turn left, out of the corner of my eye, I saw that there seemed to be a figure huddled in the corner not far away. I walked closer and indeed, it was a person. A thin and slender boy. Judging by his figure, he couldn't be much older than me. He hugged his knees with both hands and buried his head between his knees. Not noticing that someone was approaching, I let out a soft sigh. Although at first glance he looked like a poor abandoned and child with no home. But his clothes were clean, and the exposed parts of his skin looked white and smooth. It was obvious that he wasn't the same kind of person as me. He probably just had a fight with his family and ran away from home on an impulse. So I squatted down, took the boy's wrist, and gently shook it. He raised his head in surprise. But I swear by this year's new snow that the moment I saw his face, my expression must have been several times more shocked than his. In my limited knowledge up to that point, I had never seen someone so good-looking. He had naturally long and narrow phoenix eyes. Long and curled eyelashes that were clearly defined, although his skin was a bit pale and sickly. On him, it just added charm to the bright eyes like to dots of paint. This area was not safe in the first place. And all kinds of dirty things that ordinary people couldn't imagine were countless and emerged one after another. If he was good-looking, it would be even more unsafe. What if, by bad luck, my foster parents happened to see him? I didn't dare to think further. I shook my head, looked up, and stared into his eyes. I tried my best to smile and asked, "What are you doing here all alone? Why don't you go home?" He pulled his hand back, leaned back a bit, and his voice was so cold that it had no warmth at all. "I don't want to go home. But it's very cold outside." I tried to persuade him again. "And this place is too remote." I said I don't want to go back. He interrupted me. Then he asked, "Why are you meddling in my business? Do we know each other? Are we close?" Naturally, we didn't know each other. We had just met by chance and were strangers. But it was really easy for something to happen to him if he stayed here alone. Just consider me a good Samaritan who likes to meddle in other people's business. Then how about making a deal? I said, "What do you want me to do for you to go back? You can make a request of me, and I will try my best to fulfill it." The other person seemed to be interested in this. "Really? Really?" I replied firmly. "Okay then." He curled the corners of his lips. And the ending sound dragged on for a long time. "Take me home." The young master lived in a villa on the hillside in the western suburbs of the city. On the hillside. Really on the hillside. When we stood at the entrance, and he told me that he couldn't get anyone to pick us up, and we needed to walk to the residential area on the halfway up the hill by ourselves. I just then realized that he was deliberately making things difficult for me. Or rather, playing with me. But when I was 8 years old, I was truly a complete good Samaritan without the slightest bit of compromise. Even though I knew he was being difficult on purpose. I still nodded without hesitation and walked up the hill towards the residential area on the halfway up the hill with him, working hard without complaint. It seems that I was born with not very good physical fitness. Even though I had been following my adoptive parents and struggling through various hardships since I was a child, I still wasn't in good shape. After walking about 1/3 of the total distance, I stopped, resting my hands on my knees and gasping for breath. The boy didn't show the slightest intention of slowing down and waiting for me. He walked past me without even glancing sideways. Just at the moment when we passed each other, somehow, I raised my wrist and touched his hand. Even the 1,000-year-old ice couldn't be colder than this. I was only wearing a single layered garment, and my hands weren't that cold. So I called out to him. In the ambiguous morning light, he turned around with a look of confusion, and I took off that scarf and handed it to him. It was red and white. That was the only thing I had that could effectively keep out the cold in winter. I knew that in fact, he didn't need it. I lived with many people in a shabby house in a narrow alley, while he lived in a villa on the halfway up the mountain in the western suburbs of the city. I couldn't even afford a cotton-padded coat in the severe winter. I grew up amidst endless scolding and mutual deception. No matter how you looked at it, I seemed more like the one who needed help than him. But at the moment when I handed out the scarf, I truly had expectations and nervously hoped that he would accept it. Probably because I had done too many things that made me feel guilty. So when I finally came across an opportunity to offer kindness, I couldn't help but care about it and cherish it extremely. Fortunately, he took that scarf and, for the first time ever, showed me a smile. And he told me that his name was Arno. So I also smiled happily and said that my name was Rainie. The clouds were still and the rain was misty. At that time, neither of us thought that I would come to the villa on the halfway up the mountain again in the future. In the autumn of the year when I was 16, my adoptive parents were imprisoned. Not long after, a subordinate of my biological father's old friend found me. He said that his employer wanted to fulfill the last wish of his old friend and hoped to take me in and raise me. Since a wealthy person was willing to provide financial support, I naturally couldn't ask for more and readily agreed. On the day I went to the Xavier family, the person who came to pick me up was Xavier. When we met for the first time, I was slightly stunned. Xavier seemed a bit uncomfortable being stared at, but he quickly reacted and smiled politely, saying that I could just call him brother from then on. So I realized that this wasn't him. Although his facial features were extremely similar, not only did the ages not match, but the temperaments were also completely different. The person in front of me was also cold and taciturn, but at least he was somewhat gentle. He didn't have that kind of gloomy and weary look between his eyebrows that Arno couldn't hide. He also didn't speak and act in a sarcastic way all the time. I cheerfully agreed to Xavier and obediently called him brother. But my mind was elsewhere. Unfortunately, heading fulfilledly. After looking around, there was no figure that seemed to be him. Looking around, none of the people standing around me were the ones I wanted to see. Perhaps out of consideration for his old friend. On the day he brought me home, Xavier's father specially held a banquet at home to welcome me. For a family banquet, as the saying goes, everyone in the family should be present. But still, I didn't see Arno. When the banquet ended, I finally couldn't hold back. I grabbed Xavier's sleeve and asked, "They said there's another brother in the family. Why haven't I seen him?" Xavier raised his eyebrows in surprise and chuckled. "You're asking about Arno?" I nodded. He leaned down slightly and casually ruffled my hair. "You'll have to wait for another 2 days. He's in the hospital." Xavier said I had to wait for another 2 days. But in reality, I met Arno again, more than 30 days later. Under the arrangement of Xavier's father, I transferred to No. 1 middle school in this city. It had been a long time since the start of the semester. During the lunch break, I passed by a corner of the playground. The teenager nimbly jumped down from the broken wall and landed right in front of me. With just one glance, I recognized that it was Arno. He should have come directly to school without going home after being discharged from the hospital. But it was obvious that he hadn't been attending classes properly even after coming. The teenager didn't look at me. After jumping down, he turned around, looked back at the wall, and then sneered. "You don't even dare to jump from such a low height?" I followed his gaze, and only then did I notice that there was still a person crouching on the wall. A timid girl. I knew her. Sylvia. A frequent figure on the confession wall and the school forum, with a whole bunch of titles like the school beauty and the goddess. It turned out that the unattainable flower in the eyes of everyone would skip class by climbing over the wall with Arno during the lunch break. And when she climbed back, I happened to catch her. She bit her lower lip tightly and hesitated on the wall for a long time. She tried to jump down several times but failed each time. So she had to show weakness and look at Arno. I really don't dare to jump. Arno frowned without showing any mercy to the fairer sex and clicked his tongue softly. How is this high? After a moment, he still gave in and stretched out his hand. He was truly favored by the Creator. Even his hands were extremely beautiful. His 5 fingers were slender, with distinct knuckles. His fair skin, under the sunlight, was like cold jade. Sylvia held this hand, took a step down from the wall with the help of his hand, and then stumbled a few steps and fell into Arno's arms. It was a posture that resembled an embrace, but it only lasted for an instant. Arno quickly pushed her gently and took a step back, saying, "All right. Get lost quickly." Then, what out a low sigh. He finally seemed to notice my presence. He raised his eyes, arched his eyebrows, and asked, "You saw all of that?" I nodded honestly. "I'm not blind." The midday sun was blazing. The exquisitely handsome teenagers stood against the light. Hearing this, he raised the corners of his lips at me. But there was not the slightest hint of a smile in his eyes. "Then don't tell anyone. Okay?" He spoke gently yet wickedly. "If there's a 4th person who knows about this, I'll hold you accountable." I looked at him and nodded honestly. "I know." Then in my heart, I silently told myself a very sad truth: he didn't recognize me anymore. We were just strangers. Several years ago. It was just a trivial encounter by chance. It was only me who had been constantly thinking about it. After school in the evening, a black Cayenne stopped at the back gate of the school. Arno was about to step into the car, but he suddenly stopped. He turned around, frowned, and looked at me. "What are you following me for?" "I'm not following you." I raised my chin in the direction of the car. "This car is here to pick me up too." He raised one of his eyebrows, and his phoenix-like eyes looked at me infuriately for a moment before asking, "Rainie?" "Yes. Xavier told me about you." He nodded. "Get in the car." The car started and drove onto the open road. I had never felt that the environment in the car was so cramped. Even the smell of the car perfume, which I had been extremely familiar with in the past, now made me feel uncomfortable. After driving for about 10 minutes, it was Arno who spoke first. He leaned back against the seat, his long eyelashes stained with the continuous stream of light flashing outside the car window, and asked me, "Why are you talking?" "Because there's nothing to talk about," I replied to him and continued to stare at the ancient poems in front of me. These were all ancient poems within the scope of the dictation test for the college entrance examination. In fact, I had already memorized them. But if I didn't do something, time would pass even more slowly. I fell silent, and my gaze swept across the pages of the paper, landing on Li Xingyin's "The Sad Zither." When my eyes lingered on the last 2 lines of the whole poem, this feeling can only become a memory. Yet in that moment, it was already bewildering. Arno suddenly leaned over. The cold and heavy aroma out of sandalwood instantly surrounded me. My gaze wandered away from the book and all landed on him. The dim light in the car cast a warm glow on his delicate profile. My hand holding the corner of the page tight and involuntarily. The atmosphere was dim and ambiguous. As the light rose and transformed, it gradually became romantic. But he himself wasn't very warm. He lowered his eyes for a moment and saw that what I had been focusing on for a long time was just page after page of ancient poems. So he sat back and snorted. Boring. I've never been one to forcefully seek things that don't belong to me. Because even if I force it, I can't get them. No matter how hard I try, it's all in vain. When I was a child, walking alone on the street, I wouldn't be envious of the beautiful dresses in the store windows. Now that I'm grown up, I understand that there's an insurmountable gap between Arno and me. So I quickly put away those inappropriate thoughts. As long as I keep my distance. Study hard. Everything will be fine from now on. When I leave the Xavier family in the future, I'll have nothing to do with him. But soon I found that reality never goes as I expect. Perhaps the god of destiny has already bent down and tied a thread between him and me. After Arno came back, the atmosphere at home became very strange. Everyone not only didn't dare to speak loudly but also became cautious when breathing. Moreover, Xavier's father and Xavier weren't very talkative by nature. Staying in such a dull and oppressive place for a long time, I always felt that my mental state wasn't normal. Although Arno was arrogant, carefree, and full of thorns, he wasn't to the extent that everyone was afraid to avoid him. Unfortunately, when you're living under someone else's roof, even if you have doubts in your heart, you don't dare to ask too many questions. You just live day by day. The black cayenne of the Xavier family was originally used to pick up and drop off Arno and me for school. But I deliberately wanted to keep my distance from him. So not long after, I took the initiative to propose that I would go to and from school by myself every day. It was just a very minor request, and Xavier's father didn't refuse. The smooth and trouble-free days didn't last long. In early October, after school, I walked out of the school gate and was suddenly covered my eyes from behind and dragged into a narrow alley. The back of my head hit the wall violently, and my vision went blank for an instant. There was a sticky liquid with a smell of blood sliding down, and my ears were buzzing continuously. After a long while, I barely managed to stand up, leaning against the wall. I lowered my head to gather my senses, and a rough, unpleasant voice with a hint of teasing came from in front of me. "You're living a pretty good life now, Rainie." That voice was all too familiar. I raised my eyes and saw that ferocious face. It was Victor. There were many children in my adoptive parents' family, and he was one of them. After they were imprisoned, he disappeared without a trace. But today, he appeared here again. "What do you want from me?" "What do I want?" A blatant sneer appeared on that person's face. The next moment, he reached out and firmly clamped my chin, leaned down close to me, and forced me to look him in the eye. "Now that you've attached yourself to a powerful family, have you forgotten your own name? Just because someone who crawled out of the gutter was adopted by a wealthy family by chance, do you think you've become a phoenix?" The jealousy burning in his eyes was too obvious. I smiled and said, "What's wrong? Just because you can't climb out yourself, you won't allow me to have a good life? Who do you think you are?" His tone suddenly rose, and his face became even more ferocious. "What gives you the right? Rainie, we all grew up in the same place. You should rot in this place with me." As he spoke, he changed the movement of his hands. His hand moved from under my chin to the top of my head. Then, Manado well sigh. He suddenly exerted force, grabbed my hair, and slammed my head against the wall one after another. The excruciating pain instantly spread to every corner of my body. In front of me was a madman who had completely lost his mind. I have no doubt that if I let him continue like this, I would die here tonight, in this alley. But my strength and consciousness were gradually fading, and the things in front of me were becoming more and more blurred. I was almost unable to even cry for help, and besides, there were no passers-by at all around here. No, even if there were, would he come to save me? Could he save me? The madman's curses entered my ears, turning into a blur of noise. My eyelids were getting heavier and heavier, and the originally burning pain was also fading away. It's just a pity. In my life, I have never had a single day that could truly be called happy. In the moment before my consciousness completely fell into the darkness, in a hazy state, I saw at the entrance of the alley, where there was a little light, a figure seemed to be walking towards me. It must be an illusion. At this moment, I'm still delusional that someone could give me a hand. I was awakened by the sound of a car horn. When I woke up, I was still in that dim alley. Hector was lying beside me. There was blood on his forehead, and he looked like he had been knocked unconscious. My gaze moved forward. The young man's eyebrows were slightly furrowed, and he was leaning against the wall with his eyes closed, one hand resting on his knee. The figure I saw before wasn't an illusion. At the moment, the light in the alley was dim, and I couldn't clearly see his situation. So I couldn't help but feel worried. Enduring the intense pain in my head, I bypassed Victor and moved closer to the young man, trying to call him, Arno? It's good that he still has consciousness. I let out a sigh of relief. Why? I glanced at Victor. Why didn't you call the police? I didn't have the strength to talk. He still had his eyes closed. After a pause, he added, my phone is also out of battery. Then it's over. My heart sank suddenly. I didn't bring my phone with me at all when I went out today. Then shall we go out and find someone to help first? Arno's voice sounded weak. He probably got some kind of injury just now. I didn't dare to move rashly, so I could only tentatively offer a suggestion. But there was no response from him for a long time. I managed to stand up, walked in front of him, squatted down, gently shook his sleeve, and called him again. His long eyelashes fluttered, and finally, he slowly opened his eyes. Are you okay? I asked him. I'm not okay. His voice was hoarse. At this moment, a car with its lights on happened to drive past the entrance of the alley. The bright light flashed by for an instant, and I finally managed to see clearly that Arno's face was as pale as paper at the moment, and there was a layer of cold sweat on his forehead. Looking further down, I saw that blood was gushing out from his wrist, as if I had been burned by fire. I withdrew my hand and asked in a trembling voice, "What's wrong with you? I don't have the strength to stand up now." He closed his eyes again. You go out and find someone to come and help. Be careful. I was born with nothing and have always had nothing. This was the first time that I actually felt a sense of impending loss. Not daring to delay any longer, I stood up and stumbled out of the alley. In the hospital, the pale light was bright and clear. I sat at the door of the operating room, not daring to look at Xavier's gloomy face. I was even more afraid to look up and see the 3 cruel words, in resuscitation, on the display screen. No one had ever told me that Arno had congenital heart disease. I sat there feeling guilty, regretful, and extremely anxious for the whole night. When the sky was about to turn white in the east, the door of the operating room finally opened slowly, and the doctor stepped out. Thankfully, fully. It was good news. At this moment, probably none of the members of the Xavier family who rushed to the hospital last night were willing to see me. Seeing that Arno was out of danger, I left tactfully. The moment I walked out of the hospital building, I looked up, and the blue sky was as clear as a wash. The weather was incredibly sunny. Perhaps this good weather gave me an illusion. At that time, I really thought that this was just a small episode with a scare but no real danger. I didn't understand at that time. The rope always breaks at the thinnest point, and misfortune always befalls the unfortunate. Later, all the hardships were just the beginning. After my foster parents were imprisoned, I thought I had disengaged from my past and could start anew. But there were always some old acquaintances from the past who still had me in their minds. Like evil spirits crawling out of the abyss, they brandished their claws, roared recklessly, and wanted to drag me back from this world into the abyss again. After that day, whether it was going to school or coming home from school, Xavier's father arranged for someone to pick me up and drop me off. On weekends and holidays, when there were no important things to do, I didn't even go out. However, it was useless. Those people were like shadows that I couldn't get rid of at all. On Sunday, there was an activity in the school art class, and a teacher led the whole class out for sketching. Walking on the street, through the noisy crowd, I just looked back in a hurry and happened to meet Victor's gaze. He stood on the opposite street, staring at me without blinking, like a hungry wolf in the wilderness that had eyes on its prey. I was like being nailed to the spot. I couldn't take a single step, and my gaze couldn't move away for a moment. After a long time, Victor opened his mouth provocatively and maliciously, making a mouth shape at me. Wait. A chill of horror instantly crawled all over my back. For a long time, I always felt that I was being watched by someone. But recently, this feeling suddenly disappeared. I knew that this was the calm before the storm. This morning, the weather was sunny and unremarkable, but my classmates looked at me with very strange eyes. I attended classes in a state of confusion for the whole morning. During the break between the 4th morning class, Someone finally reminded me to take a look at the school forum. During the lunch break, I went to the rooftop of the school. It's cold at high places. The ancients didn't lie to me. I zipped up my school uniform a little more, took a deep breath, and turned on my phone. On the campus forum of City No. 1 Middle School, countless posts about me were being refreshed rapidly. Rainie from Class 19. Senior High. She is an orphan who was abandoned and by her parents since childhood and has no one to raise her. She grew up with a criminal gang and has done a lot of dirty things. The reason she was brought back to the Xavier family is that she sacrificed herself to Arno's father. Rumors were flying everywhere. A mixture of truth and falsehood, mostly false. The more they talked, the more outrageous it became, and the more absurd it got. However, 3 people spreading a rumor can make it seem real. And the power of public opinion can distort the truth. Those dark pasts about me, the old scars that I had tried so hard to hide in my heart, were, along with the disgusting fabrications and baseless slurs, suddenly made public without any warning. I had completely become a topic of conversation. A joke. The wind on the rooftop was so strong that it made my mind a bit muddled. My phone kept popping up new messages one after another. And the notification sound was so annoying and harsh. I turned off the screen and stood at the edge of the railing, looking down. For a moment, I thought that if I just jumped off from here, everything could end. My hand had already touched the edge of the railing. I just needed to turn over. But at this moment, the phone rang. I picked up the phone and looked at the caller ID. It was Arno. I pressed the answer button. And the young man's clear voice came from the other end, tinged with a smile, asking me if I wanted to go home together in the evening. I opened my mouth but couldn't say anything. Just at this moment, an airplane glided through the clouds, leisurely leaving a white line that was temporarily imprinted on the blue sky. So I withdrew my hand, took a few steps back, and moved away from the railing. The administrator of the school forum quickly deleted all the posts that were circulating. They were deleted completely without leaving a trace. But it still couldn't stop the rumors that had spread everywhere on the campus. And such actions instead made it seem like they were trying to cover something up. I studied as usual and tried my best to persuade myself not to care. But the rumors were getting more and more intense. And I found it harder and harder to ignore those voices. The days of being pointed at were extremely difficult, every minute and every second of it. During my supposed bright and unrestrained youth, I was forced to bear one basin after another of dirty water being poured on me. Finally, having fulfilled my obsession, one evening, Victor found me. He laughed heartily and said that he could come forward to clarify things for me. But there is one condition. His 5 fingers lingered on my collar, like some kind of disgusting insect. He said, "Give yourself to me, and I'll help you." I stepped back again and fled in a hurry. He didn't chase after me. There was no need to. I clearly couldn't escape his control. Just like a cat playing with a mouse. He was enjoying that kind of desperate pleasure when the prey was on the verge of death. I can't do anything. I can't protect myself. But I'm unwilling and don't want to watch myself slide step by step into the endless abyss. So I desperately need a backer. I didn't want to drag Arno into this out of selfishness. So I set my sights on Xavier. The opportunity came very easily. During the winter vacation, on New Year's Eve, there was a family banquet of the Xavier family, and many guests came. I saw that Xavier had drunk a lot of wine and left the table halfway. This was giving me an opportunity. I was insignificant and no one paid attention to me. I didn't even need to say goodbye to anyone when I left. I bypassed the crowd, went inside the building, and secretly sneaked into Xavier's room. It was pitch black. Only half a bright moon outside the window cast a faint layer of light. By this faint light, I could see a tall figure half reclining against the head of the bed. I took a desperate gamble. I cursed myself for being shameless. But I had no other choice. I walked over, squatted down in front of him, reached out and grabbed his sleeve, and called him softly, "Brother." He responded to me. And his voice was a bit hoarse. It was really like a sacrifice. I reached out, grabbed his collar, and raised my head to kiss his lips. They were soft but icy cold, The other person was stunned for a moment, but quickly reacted. He reached out and hugged me, actively deepening the kiss. Outside the window, fireworks exploded. I hugged him and continued the kiss. But in my heart, I thought that the fireworks must be colorful and extremely gorgeous. Unfortunately, I had no chance to see them again. It seemed that all things related to beauty would avoid me when they saw me. After a long time, the other person stopped and released me. After thinking for a moment, I raised my head and called out, "Brother Xavier." The next moment, I was suddenly pushed away by him. "Look carefully." "Who am I?" I was stunned for a long time and then realized that I had kissed the wrong person. In the dimness, I felt Arno groping for the light switch. I quickly grabbed his hand. "Don't turn on the light." My tone was almost pleading. "Don't turn on the light." "Okay. I won't." He sat back in his original position, raised his hand and pressed his forehead. "You go out." I opened my mouth, wanting to explain something to him. But as soon as the first word came out, I suddenly felt that there was nothing to say and no way to explain. Regarding Victor's threat, I couldn't involve him in it. On the first day of the Lunar New Year, I went out early in the morning. Arno was in a bad mood today, and I didn't really want to face him. Just to show a little bit of the festive atmosphere, I casually bought 2 big red paper lanterns in the mall. When I carried them out of the mall gate and looked up, I saw Victor standing there waiting for me. He smiled and walked towards me step by step. He was like a fierce ghost. But I had nowhere to run and nowhere to retreat. In the dim and shabby alley, his breath was getting closer. My collar was already half open, and the red lantern lay dejectedly on the ground beside me. I closed my eyes resignedly and calculated in my heart how much longer I could hold on in this world. That kiss landed on my neck. He was already very close to me. This was the moment. The blade hidden in my sleeve, glinting with a cold light, suddenly stabbed towards his waist and abdomen. Unfortunately, after all, Victor had been a gangster for so many years and reacted very quickly. The knife deviated by half an inch, missed its target, and fell to the ground. With a clang, there was a clear sound. I finally let out a sigh, leaned against the wall in a fit of desperation, and said to Victor, "Forget it. Do whatever you want. Kill me or torture me. I just wanted to live a good life for a few days." But unfortunately, things never go as one wishes. I never get what I want. And what I'm afraid of always comes true. I've already made this last struggle. As I expected, it was indeed of no use. So, forget it. But Victor sneered again. "You want to die? It's not that easy. The people of the Xavier family are very rich. Aren't they?" A mobile phone was thrown in front of me. Victor sat on the chair in front of me, rubbing his chin with one hand. "Call them and say that you're on the 23rd floor of Jinshin building. Ask them to send someone here with the money. I want to see today how much this adopted child of theirs is worth." Well, since the sexual assault didn't work, he changed to kidnapping and extortion. I picked up the mobile phone on the ground. "What if I don't call?" Victor laughed. "Then you'll die with me." Even now, he still thought that the word death could threaten me. I opened the dialing page, entered Xavier's number, and didn't hesitate at all. There was no other reason. Xavier didn't have much contact with me, and we didn't have much affection. He was also naturally more rational. Once he learned that I was kidnapped, he would definitely call the police immediately without the slightest worry about whether the kidnapper would kill the hostage. The phone rang 3 times, and the other side answered. "Hello, brother. It's me, Rainie." There was a moment of silence on the other side. "It's Arno. My brother is out. You can tell me if you have anything." It was him. I really didn't expect that I would have the chance to hear his voice again in this life. I paused for too long, and Victor beside me raised his chin at me, indicating that I should reply. I spoke softly into the phone. "On the 23rd floor of Jinshin building. Can you come and pick me up? Just you alone." The other side paused and replied, "Okay." After that, I hung up the phone. Victor looked at me with a smile. "You missed something, sister." "What about the money?" "Arno is worth more than me." I looked back at him. The people of the Xavier family may not care about me, but they won't ignore him. When he comes, he'll be a hostage for you for free. Victor sneered and reached out to take the phone. But he had relaxed his guard and underestimated the surging hatred in my heart. Just now, because I needed to make a phone call, the rope that tied me was temporarily untied. Seizing the opportunity, I grabbed another knife that I had hidden on my body and stabbed it into his body. I exerted more force, and the blade sank inch by inch into his flesh, from shallow to deep. This time, there was no deviation at all. Victor's movement froze in mid-air. His eyes widened, and his face was filled with shock and disbelief. Then, let out a low sigh. He stared at me intently and slowly fell into a pool of blood. The bright red blood kept gushing out, winding all over the ground, probably at noon. When Arno pushed the door open and entered, what he saw was probably such a terrifying scene. I just wanted to live a good life for a few days. But unfortunately, heading forcibly, things never go as one wishes. I never get what I want. And what I'm afraid of always comes true. I've already made this last struggle. As I expected, it was indeed of no use. So, forget it. But Victor sneered again. You want to die? It's not that easy. The people of the Xavier family are very rich. Aren't they? A mobile phone was thrown in front of me. Victor sat on the chair in front of me, rubbing his chin with one hand. Call them and say that you're on the 23rd floor of Jinshin building. Ask them to send someone here with the money. I want to see today how much this adopted child of theirs is worth. Well, since the sexual assault didn't work, he changed to kidnapping and extortion. I picked up the mobile phone on the ground. What if I don't call? Victor laughed. Then you'll die with me. Even now, he still thought that the word death could threaten me. I opened the dialing page, entered Xavier's number, and didn't hesitate at all. There was no other reason. Xavier didn't have much contact with me, and we didn't have much affection. He was also naturally more rational. Once he learned that I was kidnapped, he would definitely call the police immediately without the slightest worry about whether the kidnapper would kill the hostage. The phone rang 3 times, and the other side answered. Hello, brother. It's me, Rainie. There was a moment of silence on the other side. It's Arno. My brother is out. You can tell me if you have anything. It was him. I really didn't expect that I would have the chance to hear his voice again in this life. I paused for too long, and Victor beside me raised his chin at me, indicating that I should reply. I spoke softly into the phone. On the 23rd floor of Jinshin building. Can you come and pick me up? Just you alone. The other side paused and replied. Okay. After that, I hung up the phone. Victor looked at me with a smile. You missed something, sister. What about the money? Arno is worth more than me. I looked back at him. The people of the Xavier family may not care about me, but they won't ignore him. When he comes, he'll be a hostage for you for free. Victor sneered and reached out to take the phone. But he had relaxed his guard and underestimated the surging hatred in my heart. Just now, because I needed to make a phone call, the rope that tied me was temporarily untied. Seizing the opportunity, I grabbed another knife that I had hidden on my body and stabbed it into his body. I exerted more force, and the blade sank inch by inch into his flesh, from shallow to deep. This time, there was no deviation at all. Victor's movement froze in mid-air. His eyes widened, and his face was filled with shock and disbelief. Then, when at a low sigh, he stared at me intently and slowly fell into a pool of blood. The bright red blood kept gushing out, winding all over the ground. At around noon, when Arno pushed the door open and entered, this was probably the terrifying scene he saw. My hair was in a mess, and I slumped down on the ground in a dejected manner. Beside me was the white blade that had fallen to the ground and was stained with blood, and Victor who was no longer moving. That knife didn't hit Victor's vital parts. Coupled with the timely medical treatment, he managed to save his life. A few months later, Victor was sentenced for the crime of kidnapping and was imprisoned. I could finally heave a sigh of relief. On the day I walked out of the court, from a long distance away, I saw Arno waiting for me. He was wearing a black trench coat, with one hand in his pocket, and his body was slightly leaning back against the car window. Not far away. The leaves of the Chinese parasol trees were falling, serving as a backdrop for him. He was just standing there. Clearly, he didn't do anything. Yet he attracted many passers-by to look at him frequently. I walked over and tentatively asked him, "Did you come to pick me up?" "Yeah." He straightened up and nodded. "Get in the car." It clearly seemed that he had come to pick me up on purpose. But as soon as Arno got in the car, he rested his head on the back of the seat and feigned sleep with his eyes closed, not saying a single extra word to me. The atmosphere in the car was extremely cold. So, after confirming that he wasn't really asleep, I took the initiative to start a conversation. "Thank you for that day." He opened his eyes, his voice lazy and indifferent. "Which day?" "Which day?" If we really think about it, the days I should thank him for aren't just one specific day. It should be for his heroic act at helping me in the alley, that phone call on the rooftop, and also for the opportunity he gave me to offer kindness to others when we first met several years ago. Perhaps it didn't mean much to him, but for me, it at least made me feel that I wasn't completely bad, and that my life wasn't entirely without value. Thinking of this, I suddenly felt that there was something I had to mention. I turned my head and looked at Arno's handsome side profile and asked him, "Do you still remember me?" Arno frowned. "Are you out of your mind?" "I mean before." I explained. "About 8 or 9 years ago. Around the spring festival. In Wutong Alley." I don't know how these words offended him. Arno suddenly raised his head with a gloomy face and said coldly to the driver, "Stop the car." After the car stopped steadily, he got up and got out of the car, and then slammed the car door shut with a bang. I followed him in confusion and walked beside him. "What's wrong?" He lowered his eyes and stared at a small puddle of water by the roadside. It had rained the night before, and a fallen leaf was floating on the water, swaying. "Is there any point in bringing up the past now?" I was just about to answer that actually. It didn't really matter. And since they were all old memories, it didn't matter if he really didn't remember. But before I could say anything, I heard Arno continue. "You can't have forgotten what happened on New Year's Eve so quickly, right? While trying to flirt with my brother, you're also trying to bring up the old relationship with me. You really don't miss out on anything, do you? What do you take me for?" Oh, I almost forgot about the incident of kissing him on New Year's Eve. Now that I don't have to worry about Victor anymore, it actually doesn't matter if I tell Arno the truth directly. After considering my words for a moment, I planned to explain the whole story clearly. But suddenly, I heard someone calling me from behind. I turned around and saw that it was Xavier's father. He was already past his 40s. But he was still energetic, with a straight back, and wearing a well-tailored suit. When he walked up to me, he called me by my full name and said that he had something very important to talk to me about in detail. Although he had always been serious, this was the first time he had spoken to me in such a solemn tone. Facing an elder who had shown me kindness, I naturally didn't dare to be negligent. I nodded in response and left with him. Before reaching the end of the road, I turned around and looked at Arno again. The teenager still had his eyes lowered and was standing alone by the roadside. Behind him, the Chinese parasol trees were lush, but they still had remnants of the rain on them, adding a bit more desolation for no apparent reason. With a pate, some water from the leaves fell to the ground and splashed. Even though I knew Arno wasn't looking at me, I still raised my hand and waved at him from a distance. Then I turned around, quickened my steps, and caught up with Xavier's father's back. At that time, I didn't expect that this would be the last time I saw Arno for a very long time. It was a very cliche plot. Xavier's father came to me and hoped that I would take the money and leave the Xavier family. And there was an additional condition that after leaving, I must never have any contact with his 2 sons again. He sat opposite me and pushed that card across the table. He asked me, as a parent, "You should be able to understand this feeling, right?" I didn't hesitate for even half a minute. I took the money and then nodded, saying that I could understand. Actually, I really could. Although it might not be called understanding, I understood him very well. Since I came to the Xavier family, there had indeed been too many problems. From the rumors on the school forum, to getting Arno into the emergency room because of Victor. to the recent kidnapping incident. If I were in Xavier's father's position, I wouldn't have tolerated it until now. Now that I was leading with the money, he wasn't really failing to fulfill his old friend's entrustment, and the people of the Xavier family wouldn't have to be involved in my past messy affairs anymore. It was a win-win situation for everyone, and I had no reason to refuse. It was just a bit regrettable. I didn't have a chance to explain the misunderstanding to Arno clearly, and I also didn't have a chance to ask him clearly whether he still remembered that we had met many years ago, at the beginning of the new semester. Under the arrangement of Xavier's father, I transferred to a middle school in a neighboring city, and continued my studies. In an era when the internet wasn't very developed, fortunately, hadn't fulfilled l'ad sai. The rumors about me and no one middle school of the neighboring city didn't spread here. It was a new environment with unfamiliar teachers and classmates. Here, I was just an ordinary transfer student. And no one knew me. I didn't have any messy labels that couldn't be torn off. I studied steadily and worked extremely hard. I smoothly got through my senior year of high school and was admitted to University A. The first and second years of university also passed quickly. My persona at school was that of a very timid female classmate who was almost a transparent figure and wouldn't talk unless it was necessary. I had military training and early morning classes starting at 8 o'clock, just like everyone else, and did group assignments. Everything in the past seemed to be left far behind in time. But seemed was just seemed, after all. In August, during the online classes, I randomly chose plant biology for my elective course without much thought. However, it wasn't completely a random choice. I seem to have heard someone mention once that the professor teaching this course was the youngest professor in the history of our school. The course started at the beginning of the month. In the first class, I turned on my computer, entered the live broadcast, and was stunned on the spot. The name of the teacher that I hadn't paid much attention to before, the Father Xavier, that my classmates talked about, turned out to be Xavier. Fortunately, hadn't fulfilled it was online teaching, so I didn't have to actually meet him for the time being. In case of being called on, unfortunately, hadn't fulfilled I could just pretend that my network was down, that there was a problem with the camera, or just play dead. I managed to get through the first few classes like this. On Wednesday, I was walking on the road when a woman stopped me head-on. I took a look and saw that it was Sylvia, the one who climbed over the wall with Arno in high school. So I stopped, raised my eyebrows, and asked her, "Do you need something from me?" The other person didn't answer. She just stood there, tilted her head, and looked at me carefully. After a long time, she finally came to a conclusion. "I really can't see anything special about you. I really don't understand why Arno has been so obsessed with you for such a long time." I really didn't understand why she thought Arno couldn't forget me. Anyway, hadn't fulfilled my obsession. The name that was deeply buried in my heart was suddenly mentioned by someone who seemed to be a romantic rival on the street. And she also spoke to taunt me. It was really hard for me to have a good attitude towards her. I frowned and said coldly, "Get out of the way." I swear by my final overall grade that on that day on the street, I only said these two words to Sylvia. But she started crying. Standing in front of me, on the busy street, she burst into tears with a wow. The passers-by looked calm on the surface but secretly marveled at it. It was so embarrassing. To prevent the situation from getting worse, I grabbed Sylvia and led her into a nearby coffee shop. Although there were also people in the coffee shop, there weren't as many as on the street. The scope of the embarrassment was relatively limited. From 1:35 p.m. to 2:36 p.m. Sylvia sat in front of me and cried for a full hour and 1 minute. All this time was wasted when I could have been doing my precious homework. So my expression became even worse. I gently tapped the spoon against the wall of the cup and looked up at her. "Tell me what you want to say as soon as you're done crying." She also said something astonishing. As soon as she opened her mouth, she said, "I've been chasing after Arno for 10 whole years." Me, that's something. This includes her childhood and adolescence. She continued, "But he doesn't like me." "Yes, heading so wide sure. That's normal. You can't force it. Just try to let it go." She lowered her head, took a sip of coffee, and then said, The one he likes is you. I almost dropped the cup in my hand to the ground. I composed myself and asked her. How do you know that? Sylvia let out a long sigh. In June this year. I confessed to him. It was the 16th time. Or maybe the 18th time. Anyway. He rejected me again. But this time. He gave me a reason for rejecting me. He already has someone he likes. Oh. You should ask who that person is. Oh, then who is she? It's you. How do you know that? Arno told me himself that the person he likes is named Rainie. He has kept a red and white scarf for many years. He said it was given to him by you. With a crisp sound, the silver spoon in my hand suddenly fell back into the cup. The red and white scarf. Before these 4 words were spoken, no matter what Sylvia said, I could tell myself that it might just be her guess, speculation, or misunderstanding. It couldn't be taken seriously. But unexpectedly, she mentioned this scarf. If Arno hadn't taken the initiative to tell her about it, no third person would ever know about this thing. He really still remembers me. He has always remembered. I'm not the only one who can't forget that first encounter in childhood. After being apart for 3 years, I learned that he had feelings for me from someone else. Counting all the clues from the past, on New Year's Eve, in the face of my deliberate flirting, he was clearly conscious but didn't refuse either. The figure I saw in the dim alley before I fainted. The phone call I received from him when I was standing on the school rooftop amidst the rumors. It was like the clouds had cleared and the sun had emerged, and thousands of rays of golden light had spilled down. His feelings had already been shown very clearly. He likes me. After all these years. The secret feelings for Arno in my heart finally saw the light of day again and were laid bare in the sun. The seed fell to the ground, took root, and sprouted. In an instant, it grew into a towering tree. The desire to see Arno again was stronger than ever before. I couldn't wait to appear in front of him right now and throw myself into his arms. But a few seconds later, my rationality gradually returned, and I forced myself to calm down. The agreement with Father Xavier was still in effect. According to the agreement, I couldn't have any more contact with the people of the Xavier family. Moreover, I left without saying goodbye back then. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to suddenly and abruptly appear in front of Arno now. But all the rationality I had at the moment would dissipate completely in the online class 2 days later. On Friday, during the online 8 o'clock class in the morning, I was sleeping as usual. After Xavier announced the end of the class, I opened my eyes, ready to turn off the computer and go out for a meal. But at the moment I opened my eyes, I saw a man and a woman on the computer screen embracing and kissing. The man had his back to the camera, and it was not easy to see his face clearly. His figure was also very similar to Xavier's. I originally thought it was an oolong incident involving Father Xavier. But at the moment when my gaze was about to leave the computer screen, I caught a glimpse of the man's wrist. There was a faint red scar on it, almost invisible. It was the scar left when Arno's wrist was injured when we first met Victor in the alley. The person on the screen was not Xavier at all. It was Arno. I raised my eyes again and carefully looked at the beautiful figure embracing Arno. It was very obvious that it was Sylvia. Facing such a scene, anyone who could still sit still must be a bodhisattva. It wasn't difficult to inquire about Arno's recent situation. After graduating, he was admitted to University B as the top scorer in the city's college entrance examination. And the university was in this city. But recently, due to health reasons, he had been living in the hospital. He didn't like going out much on weekdays. But he would wander around outside at around 6 or 7 p.m. I calculated the time and place and deliberately appeared on the road he often walked on. So as I wished, I was stopped by him. When he pulled me into the entrance of the alley, and I finally saw the face that I had been thinking about day and night, I suddenly had the thought of teasing him. I looked at him with a feigned look of confusion and asked, "Father Xavier?" As expected, he was angry. With red eyes, he pressed me against the wall. Then he bent down and gritted his teeth next to my ear, saying word by word, "I'm not him." He then asked me how much I had seen during the online class that day. So I guided him further and made him say that he cared about my opinion. At this point, there was really nothing that couldn't be understood. After I got back that day, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I answered it. And on the other end was Sylvia's voice with a smile. She said that she knew I was now Xavier's student. And the incident during the online class was that she got Arno drunk and deliberately hugged him to act. The camera's recording was inaccurate. And they didn't really kiss. Sure enough. After the online class incident, both Arno and I couldn't hold our nerves. He was eager to explain. And I was anxious to see him. I just felt very sorry that it made Father Xavier lose face. I hung up the phone and secretly rejoiced in my heart. There were more than 30 people taking this elective course. And not a single one of them took a screenshot of that kissing scene and spread it after class. In early October, the situation of epidemic prevention and control was very good, and University A issued a notice of the upcoming start of the semester. At school, I finally met Xavier in person. But no matter how he questioned me, and asked me many times whether I remembered the things in the past, I pretended to have amnesia and evaded his questions. I originally thought I could hide it until the end of the semester like this. But unexpectedly, in the second week of class, I was marked absent by Father Xavier because I was 3 minutes late. Anyone with eyes could see that this was a blatant targeting. I started to behave cautiously from then on. But when I walked out of the teaching building on Tuesday night, I was told by the teaching assistant that I might be at risk of failing Father Xavier's elective course at the end of the semester. This is something that cannot be tolerated. So, facing the bright and warm sun in October, I knocked on the door of Father Xavier's office. I originally planned to ask for an explanation. But he turned the tables on me. You remembered the things in the past a long time ago. Didn't you? You still remember Brother Xavier. And you also remember Arno. The encounter with Arno on the street that day was arranged by you on purpose. Right? If you still have lingering feelings for him, as Arno's brother, I don't mind taking even more excessive actions against you. When he said these words, he had a haughty attitude and a casual posture. His eyes were filled with nothing but the disdain of a superior and an elder brother, as well as the certainty of victory. But when he said these words, I no longer had that feeling of being unsure as before. What do you mean by more excessive things? I asked him calmly. Marking me absent without reason, failing me out of malice, or suppressing students with privileges. You know I'm not that kind of person. But Xavier suddenly sat up straight and frowned tightly. It was as if what I had just said was a great insult to his character. And it was indeed the case. Xavier then said to me, the violations I marked before, I will ask the teaching assistant to cancel them for you later. This is just a warning. So, there won't be any more targeting of me regarding my studies in the future. Right? No. And there's nothing more to worry about. He nodded slightly, but it won't be difficult for me to do something else to you. Why? I was puzzled. Putting in so much effort just to stop a relationship? I'm not a terrifying monster. Why? He looked at me with his dark eyes and rolled these 2 words around in his mouth. Then, let out a low sigh. He sneered and said, I also want to ask, why are you doing this? Clearly, as long as you let go of Arno, you can live in peace and continue to live the peaceful life you had before. Why do you have to touch my sore spot? I shook my head. You don't understand. It was Arno who accepted my gift and carefully preserved it for many years. It was him who risked having a heart attack and going into the operating room to save my life in that dim and shabby alley. It was him who talked to me in a normal tone when there were so many rumors swirling around. It was him who could rush to Jinshin building to pick me home immediately after receiving an unclear phone call. I once thought that my life would be a long period without light. And even, it would be permanent darkness. Until I met Arno. He is the one who can pull me out of the abyss. 3 years ago, I was in the middle of the situation and didn't know his feelings. After reaching an agreement with Father Xavier, I disappeared without a trace from Arno's world. Now, fortunately, heading fulfilledly, I have received the mercy of heaven. And I actually have a chance to reunite with him. It is precisely because I once lost him that today, no matter what, I will never let him go again. So, I looked at Xavier and said seriously, do whatever you want. Anyway, heading fulfilledly, I won't leave him again. After saying that, I turned around and walked out of his office. The four-season peach blossoms on the campus were still falling in profusion, with petals fluttering and falling to the ground. After the second evening class ended, I walked out of the teaching building. The crowd was bustling, and many students who had just finished class dispersed like the ebb tide. But there was one person with a tall figure, standing out from the crowd. I was holding a stack of books in my arms, raised one hand, and waved at him from a distance. That person seemed to sense it, raised his eyes, and looked in my direction. His long and beautiful phoenix eyes reflected the halo of the streetleted, filled with little bits of laughter. I put down my hand, quickly stepped down the steps, and walked towards him. In late autumn, when winter was approaching, it was already a bit cold at night. I handed him the books in my hand and called his name with a smile, Arno. On that New Year's Eve. Are you still willing to listen to my explanation about the thing that I call Father Xavier's name? He curved his eyes and smiled, lifting the corners of his lips. Okay. The end.